Rain stitched the evening together in thin silver lines, turning the streets of Harborview into a mirror that reflected neon signs and tired headlights. People hurried with collars up and umbrellas angled like shields, as if the weather itself had teeth. In the middle of it all, a little girl stood under the narrow overhang of a closed bakery, cradling 3 red roses wrapped in damp brown paper. Her name was Lila, and she was 9, small for her age, with elbows that looked too sharp for her sleeves and shoes that had long stopped pretending to fit. Her hair was gathered into 2 braids that had begun to unravel, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold and from trying not to cry. She watched the front doors of the Sable Meridian Hotel, the most expensive place in Harborview, where chandeliers hung like captured stars and the lobby smelled like citrus and money. Black cars came and went. Men in suits stepped out like they owned the pavement. Women in sleek coats laughed softly, phones glowing in their hands. Lila held the roses closer. The petals were beginning to curl at the edges from the damp air, but they still looked brave, 3 bright hearts in a gray world. Her mother had told her, that very morning, Valentine's Day is not about grand gifts, baby. It's about being remembered. Lila had nodded like she understood, but the truth was she only understood the part where her mother's eyes had looked far away, past the peeling wallpaper of their tiny apartment, past the stack of unpaid bills on the table, past the coughing fits that stole her breath. Her mother's name was Maris, gentle, soft-spoken, and now growing lighter in the world with each passing day. Maris lay in a hospital bed at St. Callista Medical Center, where the walls were clean and the costs were cruel. Every day Lila visited after school, sitting by her mother's bedside, telling her stories about imaginary kingdoms and heroic cats that rescued lost princes, and Maris would smile even when she didn't have the strength to lift her hand. That morning, Maris had said something that landed in Lila's chest like a stone. "I don't think I'll be here much longer." "No," Lila had whispered, gripping her mother's hand hard enough to press her own heat into those cool fingers. "You will. You have to." Maris had smiled sadly. "Listen to me. If the time comes soon, I don't want your last memories to be only tears and hospitals. I want one more beautiful day. Just one." Lila had swallowed, her throat burning. We can buy flowers. And candy." Maris had turned her face toward the window where weak winter sunlight spilled in. "Flowers would be nice. But what I really wanted when I was young," her voice thinned, "I always dreamed of a Valentine who would make me feel seen. Not rich. Not fancy. Just seen." Lila's mind had started sprinting. She had no money for fancy anything. But she had something else, stubborn love that refused to accept impossible. That afternoon, she had gone behind the corner market where the owner tossed out bruised produce and wilted bouquets. She found a handful of roses tossed aside because their stems were crooked and their petals weren't perfect. She picked through them carefully, choosing the 3 that still looked most alive. She wiped them clean with the hem of her shirt, wrapped them in paper she found in the recycling bin, and held them as if they were treasure. Now she stood outside the Sable Meridian Hotel because she had overheard nurses at St. Callista whispering about a man who donated to hospitals and charities, a man who could pay for an entire wing of a building with the change in his pocket. His name was Adrian Vale. They said he was a billionaire. They also said he was cold, unreachable. A man with a penthouse view and a locked door around his heart. The kind of man who moved through life with the protection of distance. But Lila didn't need him to be warm. She needed him to say yes. The hotel doors opened again, and a gust of warm air spilled out along with a small crowd. Security walked first, scanning the sidewalk. Behind them came Adrian Vale. He was taller than Lila expected, wearing a charcoal coat that looked tailored to his shoulders, the collar turned up against the rain. His hair was dark and neatly combed, rain beating on it like tiny crystals. He didn't look like someone who smiled often. His face was sharp with discipline, his eyes focused forward as if he had places to be that didn't include feelings. People moved aside for him without thinking. That kind of wealth had gravity. Lila's heart hammered so hard she felt it in her ears. Her hands shook around the roses. If she waited, she'd lose her nerve. If she stepped forward, she might be ignored, or worse, thrown out. She stepped forward anyway. "Sir." "Mr. Vale." The security men turned instantly, forming a wall. One held out a palm, stopping her like she was a problem that had wandered into the wrong part of town. Adrian Vale paused. His eyes flicked down to her, and for a moment something unreadable passed across his expression. Surprise, irritation, maybe even curiosity. "What is this?" he asked, voice calm and low. Lila lifted the roses. "I'm not selling them." One of the security men scoffed. "Kid, you can't." Adrian lifted a hand, and the security man fell silent like a switch had been flipped. Lila swallowed hard. "My mom is in the hospital. She's really sick. And she wanted a Valentine." The rain tapped on the hotel awning above them. The city kept moving, indifferent. Adrian's eyebrows drew slightly together. "A Valentine?" "Yes," Lila said, rushing on before her courage evaporated. "She's at St. Callista. She doesn't have anyone. It's just me. I don't have money, but I have these roses. Please." Adrian looked at the roses, then at Lila's thin coat, then at her eyes. His gaze was not cruel, but it was not soft either, more like a man examining a situation he hadn't planned for. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you can fix this," she wanted to scream. "Because you have the power to make her smile one more time." Instead she said the truth. "Because I heard you help people. And because I don't know what else to do." Silence stretched. Behind Adrian, the hotel lights gleamed like gold. In front of him, a little girl stood in the rain holding 3 imperfect roses like they were a prayer. Adrian's jaw tightened. "I have meetings." Lila's face crumpled for half a second, but she forced her voice steady. "It won't take long. Just come with me to see her. Tell her Happy Valentine's Day. That's all." One security man leaned toward Adrian. "Sir, we should go." Adrian didn't move. His eyes stayed on Lila. "What's your mother's name?" "Maris," Lila whispered, hope flickering like a candle struggling against wind. Adrian exhaled slowly. He looked past her at the street, at his waiting car, at the rain that made everything look softer than it was. Then he said, very quietly, "Get in the car." Lila froze. "What?" Adrian nodded once. "You said it won't take long." Her breath caught. "You'll do it." Adrian's expression didn't change much, but something in his eyes shifted, like a door that had been closed for years had just clicked open by accident. "Yes," he said. "I'll do it." And the city, for the first time all day, felt like it had made room for something good. Lila slid into the back seat of the car as if she feared someone might change their mind if she moved too slowly. The interior smelled like leather and faint cologne, warm and clean in a way that felt unreal compared to the damp chill clinging to her coat. Her roses dripped quietly onto the floor mat, and she tried to tuck them closer to her chest so they wouldn't leave a mess. Adrian Vale sat across from her, angled slightly toward the window, phone in hand. His driver pulled away from the curb with smooth precision, the city lights blurring into streaks on the rain-slicked glass. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Lila's thoughts tumbled. What if he was only taking her somewhere to hand her over to the police for harassing him? What if he got to the hospital and refused to step inside? What if her mother looked at him and didn't smile at all? She clenched her hands around the roses. They were damp, but still bright. Adrian's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his brow tightening, then spoke into the device with a kind of measured authority that made people listen even if they didn't want to. "No," he said. "Reschedule the call." A pause. "I understand the contract deadline. Reschedule it anyway." Another pause. "Yes, tonight." He ended the call, and Lila stared at him in shock. She had expected him to be the kind of man who didn't bend for anyone, not for weather, not for strangers, not for sick mothers. You're missing your meeting," she said before she could stop herself. Adrian's gaze stayed on the window. "Meetings can be moved." Lila swallowed. "My mom can't." That earned her his attention. He turned slightly, looking at her with something that wasn't quite softness, but also wasn't annoyance. More like a careful recognition. "How long has she been in the hospital?" he asked. Lila tried to sound older than she felt. "A long time. But worse lately." "What's wrong with her?" Lila hesitated, searching for the right words. "Her lungs. She coughs a lot. She gets tired even talking." Adrian nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "And your father?" Lila's throat tightened. "He left when I was little. I don't remember him." The car passed over a bridge where the river below reflected the city like broken glass. Lila watched the lights ripple and thought about all the things she didn't have: a father, money, the power to change what was happening to her mother. Then she looked at the man across from her, the man who did have power, and she wondered what it felt like to carry that much control. Did it feel heavy? Did it feel lonely? Adrian spoke again. "Who told you about me?" Lila shifted. "The nurses. They said you gave money before. For equipment." Adrian's mouth tightened as if he disliked being talked about. "People exaggerate." Lila blurted, "Then why are you doing this?" The driver's eyes flicked up in the mirror, curious. Adrian was quiet long enough that Lila worried she'd offended him. Then he said, "Because you didn't ask for money." Lila frowned. "I would have if—" "No," Adrian cut in, not harshly, but firmly. "You asked for time. That's rarer." Lila stared at him. Time. That was exactly it. She wasn't begging for a donation. She was begging for a moment, one moment where her mother could feel chosen, seen, remembered. The car turned onto a quieter road, and the buildings changed from glittering high-rises to older blocks with dimmer streetlights. St. Callista Medical Center wasn't in the rich part of Harborview. It was where people went when they didn't have connections, only need. When they reached the hospital entrance, Adrian's security moved first, scanning, opening doors, shielding him from the rain. Lila hopped out after them, clutching the roses as if they were her ticket to hope. Inside, the hospital smelled like disinfectant and tired air. The fluorescent lights made everything look paler, as if the world here had been drained of color. Lila led Adrian through the lobby. People glanced at him, some recognized him, some just sensed his wealth. Nurses slowed as they passed. A couple of patients in wheelchairs stared openly. Adrian kept his face unreadable, but Lila noticed how his steps slowed slightly when they passed a children's ward decorated with paper hearts taped to the windows. Valentine's Day decorations, cheerful and fragile, trying to make illness look less terrifying. They reached the elevator, and Lila pressed the button repeatedly, as if impatience could make it arrive faster. When the doors opened, Lila stepped in first. Adrian followed, tall and silent, filling the small space with an energy that made the air feel tighter. "What room?" he asked. "7th floor. Room 712. The elevator hummed upward. Lila's stomach flipped like she was about to take a test she hadn't studied for. She imagined her mother's face, tired, pale, but still trying to smile for her. She imagined her mother seeing Adrian Vale, this distant, powerful man, standing at her bedside like some ridiculous dream come to life. What if Maris was too weak to react? What if she was asleep? What if it made things worse? As if sensing the storm inside her, Adrian spoke quietly. "If she's asleep, we won't wake her." Lila looked up, startled. "Okay." "And if she doesn't want visitors," he added, "we leave." Lila nodded, even though the idea of leaving felt like failing. The elevator doors opened onto the 7th floor. The hallway was quieter here, the sound softened by carpet and distance. Machines beeped somewhere behind closed doors. A nurse's shoes squeaked faintly. Lila walked quickly, then slowed as they approached room 712. Her hand hovered over the handle. This was it. She took a breath and pushed the door open. Inside, Maris lay propped up against pillows, her hair thinner than before, her skin pale under the harsh light. But her eyes turned immediately toward Lila, and a smile, small but real, appeared. "My brave girl," Maris whispered. Lila stepped in, heart pounding, then turned back toward Adrian. He paused in the doorway. For the first time since Lila had seen him outside the hotel, he looked uncertain, like a man who could negotiate million-dollar deals without blinking but didn't know what to do with a room full of sorrow and love. Lila held up the roses, her voice trembling. "Mom, I brought someone." Maris's eyes focused, then widened slightly as Adrian stepped forward. "Good evening," he said, carefully polite. "My name is Adrian Vale." Maris stared at him, and for a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Then Maris let out a soft laugh that turned into a cough. You're not real." Lila rushed to her mother's side. "He is. He came. He came for Valentine's Day." Maris's eyes filled with tears she didn't seem to have the strength to wipe away. Adrian took one step closer. His voice lowered, gentler. "I'm real. And I'm here." Maris blinked rapidly. "Why?" Lila squeezed her mother's hand. "Because you wanted a Valentine. And because you deserve one." Adrian looked at Lila, then back to Maris, and something in his face softened in a way that made him look younger, less carved from stone. Maris whispered, "I don't even know what to say." Adrian glanced at the roses. "Perhaps, Happy Valentine's Day." Lila placed the roses carefully on the bedside table, arranging them like they mattered, because they did. Maris stared at the roses, then at Adrian, then at Lila, and her smile grew wider than Lila had seen in weeks. It was working. But Lila didn't yet know that this small moment would become something much bigger, something that would pull all of them into a story none of them expected. Maris kept looking between Adrian and the roses as if the sight might dissolve if she blinked too long. Her fingers, thin and trembling, lifted slightly from the blanket. Lila caught her hand, pressed it gently against her cheek. "You're cold," Lila whispered. Maris smiled faintly. "Hospitals don't believe in warmth." Adrian's gaze swept the room, medical charts, the four-stand, the oxygen tubing, the thin blanket that looked more symbolic than useful. He didn't touch anything, but his attention felt like a quiet audit. "Sit," Maris said suddenly, her voice weak but firm. Adrian hesitated. "There," Maris insisted, nodding toward the chair beside her bed. "If you're going to be someone's Valentine, you can't stand like a stranger at the door." Lila's eyes widened. She'd never seen her mother order anyone around, especially not someone like Adrian Vale. But Maris had always possessed a hidden steel, soft on the outside, unbreakable underneath. Adrian blinked once, then moved to the chair and sat. The chair looked too small for him, like the hospital hadn't designed furniture for men who carried empires on their shoulders. Maris watched him closely. "You're very kind." Adrian's mouth tightened, as if the word kind didn't fit him properly. "Your daughter is persistent." Maris chuckled, then coughed. Lila rubbed her mother's hand. "Don't laugh too much, Mama." Maris's eyes softened. "You did this, Lila?" Lila nodded, throat thick. I wanted you to smile. One more time." Maris's eyes shimmered with tears. "You always bring the sun, even when you have none to spare." Adrian's gaze flicked away as if he'd overheard something too private. Maris studied him again. "Adrian Vale," she murmured, tasting his name. "I've heard it before. People speak of you like you're a storm in a suit." Adrian's expression remained guarded. "People like stories." Maris smiled. "So do I." She shifted slightly, wincing. Lila helped adjust her pillow. Adrian watched the movement, the small ways illness stole comfort, the tiny negotiations for breath. Maris took a careful inhale. "Tell me something, Mr. Vale. Are you lonely?" Lila's eyes snapped to her mother, shocked. "You can't ask that," she wanted to say. "Not to him. Not to anyone." Adrian went very still. The room seemed to sharpen around the question. Finally, he answered, voice calm. "Loneliness is a luxury I don't have time for." Maris nodded slowly. "That sounds like a lonely person's answer." Lila squeezed her mother's hand harder, half proud, half terrified. Adrian held Maris's gaze for a long moment. Something flickered behind his eyes. Annoyance, maybe, but also something else, something like recognition. He said, "Why did you want a Valentine?" Maris looked toward the window where rain tapped softly. "Because when you're sick for a long time, the world starts to treat you like a problem to manage. Not a person." She swallowed. "I wanted to feel like I was still worth choosing." Lila's lips trembled. She leaned closer. "You are." Maris smiled at her daughter. "I know you choose me. But you're my child. Your love is automatic. I wanted," her voice broke slightly, "I wanted to remember what it felt like to be admired. Just for a moment." Adrian's gaze dropped to the roses, then to Maris's hands. "Admiration is overrated." Maris laughed softly. "Spoken like someone who's drowning in it." Lila watched Adrian's face, looking for cracks in the billionaire mask. She saw one, tiny, but real, when his jaw flexed as if he was holding back words. A nurse knocked gently and entered with a clipboard. She froze mid-step when she saw Adrian. "Oh, Mr. Vale," she stammered. "We didn't know you were." Adrian stood smoothly. "I'm visiting." The nurse's eyes flicked to Lila, then to Maris, then back to Adrian with sudden warmth. "That's wonderful. Miss Maris, how are you feeling?" Maris lifted her chin. "Like I have a Valentine." The nurse laughed in surprise, then quickly recovered. "Well, that's the best medicine, isn't it?" She made notes, checked Maris's and asked a few routine questions. Lila watched Maris's breathing, the way her chest rose shallowly. When the nurse left, Maris's smile faded slightly, exhaustion pulling at her like a tide. Adrian noticed. "You should rest." Maris shook her head. "Not yet. I want to enjoy this." Adrian's gaze softened. "Enjoy what?" Maris gestured weakly at him. "This absurd moment. A billionaire sitting by my bed because my daughter refused to accept disappointment." Lila blushed. "I didn't want you to be sad." Maris's eyes filled again. "You made me happy, baby." Adrian cleared his throat. "How long have you been at St. Callista?" 6 months, Maris whispered. "Maybe longer. Time gets slippery here." Adrian's eyes sharpened. "And your treatment plan?" Maris sighed. "Treatments, tests, waiting. They say there are options, but options cost money." Lila's stomach dropped. She hated hearing adults talk about money like it was the gatekeeper to life. Maris reached for Lila's hand. "It's okay. We've done our best." Lila's eyes burned. "No. We can do more." Adrian watched the exchange, silent. Maris turned back to him. "Mr. Vale." "Adrian, may I call you Adrian?" He hesitated. "If you like." Maris nodded. "Adrian, I won't ask you for money. I won't embarrass my daughter by begging." She coughed lightly. "But I will ask you for one thing." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "What thing?" Maris's voice softened. "Tell Lila a story." Lila blinked. "Mama." Maris smiled. "A story about your life. About how you became who you are. I want her to hear that the world isn't only pain." Adrian looked like he'd been asked to remove his armor in public. He sat back down slowly, hands clasped. "My life isn't a bedtime story," he said. Maris's eyes held his. "Then tell the part you wish had been different. That's always the part children understand." Lila stared at him, holding her breath. Adrian was silent. In the quiet, the hospital machines sounded louder. Then, slowly, he spoke. "I grew up in a place called Briar Hollow. Small town. No glamour. My mother worked 2 jobs. My father," he paused. "My father left." Lila's eyes widened. Adrian Vale had a father who left. Adrian continued, voice steady, but the words carried weight. "I learned early that if you want safety, you build it yourself. I studied, worked, built a company, then another." He exhaled. "When people started calling me successful, I thought it would feel like winning." Maris murmured, "And did it?" Adrian's jaw tightened. It felt like silence. Lila swallowed. Why? Adrian looked at her, and for the first time, his gaze felt personal. Because when you spend your whole life building walls, eventually you forget how to live without them. Maris's eyes softened with understanding. That's why you came today. Adrian's expression flickered. I came because she asked. Maris smiled. And you said yes. The room held that truth, simple and powerful. Lila leaned closer to her mother. Maris's eyelids drooped with fatigue, but her smile remained. Thank you, Maris whispered to Adrian. For being here. For letting my daughter believe in miracles. Adrian's voice was quiet. Miracles are rare. Maris squeezed Lila's hand. Then maybe this is one. Lila watched Adrian's face, and she realized something. This wasn't just about her mother's Valentine wish. Something had shifted in Adrian too, something he hadn't expected to feel. And as Maris finally closed her eyes to rest, Lila sat beside her, roses on the table, Billionaire in the chair, rain still tapping at the window like the world was waiting to see what would happen next. Maris slept for nearly an hour, breathing shallowly, her face peaceful in a way Lila hadn't seen in weeks. Lila didn't move much, afraid any sound might steal the fragile calm. Adrian sat quietly, phone face down in his hand, gaze drifting around the room as if memorizing details he'd never bothered to notice in places like this. At some point, Lila's stomach growled. She tried to hide it by shifting in her chair. Adrian glanced at her. Have you eaten? Lila hesitated. A little. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly, the way adults looked when they knew children were lying but didn't want to embarrass them. He stood. Stay here. Lila's heart jumped. You're leaving. I'm getting food, he said simply. Lila watched him step out of the room. 2 security men appeared instantly, one lingering at the door, the other walking with Adrian down the hall. The scene felt surreal, like a movie where a rich man visits a poor family and everything changes. Lila leaned closer to her mother. Mama, she whispered. Are you happy? Maris's eyelids fluttered. She didn't fully wake, but she smiled faintly. Yes, she breathed. So happy. Tears stung Lila's eyes. She squeezed her mother's hand carefully. Good. Adrian returned with a small paper bag and a bottle of water. He handed them to Lila without ceremony. What is it? Lila asked. Soup. Bread. Fruit, he said. Eat. Lila's throat tightened again, because he wasn't just doing the Valentine thing anymore. He was doing more. Thank you, she whispered. Adrian nodded once, then looked at Maris. How long has she been declining? Lila took a sip of water. The doctors say her lungs are getting weaker. She can't handle the treatments well anymore. Adrian stared at the hospital chart clipped near the bed. Who's her primary physician? I don't know, Lila admitted. Different doctors come. Different nurses. They're nice, but they're always busy. Adrian's expression shifted, something like disapproval, not at Lila, but at the system. He stepped out into the hallway and spoke to a passing nurse. Lila couldn't hear everything, but she heard Adrian's calm tone and the nurse's suddenly flustered replies. A few minutes later, a doctor entered the room. He was middle-aged with tired eyes, a badge that read Dr. Kellen Price. He glanced at Adrian, visibly startled, then recovered. Mr. Vale, he said. I didn't realize you were visiting. Adrian's voice remained even. I want to understand Maris Harlow's condition and options. Lila blinked. Maris's last name wasn't Harlow. Lila had changed it in her head for stories, but the doctor said it like it was official. Maybe Lila had just never paid attention. Dr. Price looked toward Lila, then back to Adrian. Are you family? Adrian paused for a fraction of a second. I'm here at her request. Dr. Price hesitated, then chose professionalism. Maris is dealing with advanced pulmonary failure. We've been managing symptoms and trying to stabilize her, but her condition has worsened rapidly in the last few weeks. Lila's hands clenched. Hearing it said out loud made it heavier. Adrian asked, Is there a pathway for transplant consideration? Dr. Price's brows lifted. Potentially, but she's not a candidate right now due to overall weakness, and there are additional evaluations. It's complex. Adrian's gaze sharpened. Complex often means expensive. Dr. Price exhaled. Yes. Lila felt like she might explode. So she just gets worse. Dr. Price softened at Lila's voice. We do everything we can. But resources. Adrian cut in gently. If resources were not an issue, what would you do? The doctor blinked, then answered carefully. We'd move her to a specialized pulmonary institute for advanced intervention. There are experimental therapies, intensive rehabilitation programs. But the waiting lists. And the costs, Adrian finished. Dr. Price nodded. Adrian was silent. Lila watched him, trying to read his face. Billionaires made decisions that moved stock markets. Could he make a decision that moved a life? Maris stirred, eyelids lifting weakly. Lila, she whispered. I'm here, Lila said quickly, leaning in. Maris's gaze flicked to Adrian, then to the doctor. What's happening? Adrian leaned closer so his voice wouldn't feel like a boardroom. We're discussing options. Maris's eyes sharpened faintly. Options cost money. Lila's chest tightened. Maris looked at Adrian with weary honesty. Don't do that thing where rich people feel inspired for one day and then disappear. She swallowed. I don't want pity. I don't want to be someone's charity story. Adrian held her gaze. I'm not here to buy a feel-good moment. Maris's lips pressed together. Then why are you here? Adrian's voice lowered. Because when your daughter asked me for time, I realized I've been spending mine like it's infinite. Silence filled the room again. Maris's eyes glistened. That's not my problem to fix. I know, Adrian said. But it might be my problem to face. Dr. Price cleared his throat softly, uncomfortable. If you'd like, I can step out. Maris sighed. No. It's fine. Adrian stood straighter. Doctor, I want a full review of Maris's case. Every possible path. Transfers. Trials. Specialists. I want names. Dr. Price's eyes widened. Mr. Vale. Adrian's tone stayed calm but carried weight. This is not a request for false hope. It's a request for clarity. Dr. Price nodded slowly. Understood. After the doctor left, Maris stared at Adrian. You're serious? Adrian nodded once. Yes. Maris's voice trembled, not with weakness this time but emotion. Why would you do this for someone you don't know? Adrian's eyes flicked to Lila. Because she knows you. And because I'm tired of being the kind of man who only helps from a distance. Lila felt her breath catch. She didn't want to hope too hard. Hope had hurt them before. Maris closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, her gaze was steady. If you help me, you don't get to own us. You don't get to rewrite our lives like we're characters in your story. Adrian's voice softened. I don't want to own anyone. Maris watched him, searching for truth. Then she nodded faintly. Okay. Lila's tears finally spilled. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed. Adrian noticed and handed her a clean handkerchief from his coat pocket. Simple, white, expensive. Lila took it carefully like it was fragile. Thank you, she whispered. Adrian looked at her. Your mother was right about you. Lila blinked. What? He hesitated, then said, You don't accept disappointment. Lila shook her head fiercely. Not for her. Adrian's gaze held hers. Then we'll see what can be done. Outside the window, the rain slowed, thinning into mist. And for the first time in months, Lila felt something she hadn't dared to feel. A future. The next 2 days moved like a blur, as if the world had shifted into a faster gear without asking permission. Adrian returned. Not once, but repeatedly. He didn't show up with photographers or dramatic speeches. He showed up with quiet efficiency, paperwork, phone calls, a specialist flown in from Crescent Bay Pulmonary Institute, and a hospital administrator who suddenly treated Maris's case like it was the most urgent file in the building. Lila watched it all with disbelief. Maris, however, watched Adrian with suspicion that slowly softened into something else, cautious respect. She didn't gush gratitude. She didn't play the role of saved woman. She stayed herself, sharp-minded even through exhaustion, fiercely protective of Lila, and unwilling to surrender her dignity. On Valentine's Day evening, the hospital room looked different. Someone had brought a small vase for the roses. A nurse taped paper hearts along the wall. The lights were dimmer, warmer. A volunteer dropped off a plate with a single slice of cake and 2 plastic forks. Lila sat beside her mother, swinging her feet because she couldn't help it. "Mama, look. Cake." Maris smiled faintly. "We're living dangerously." Adrian entered carrying a small bag. No security this time, just him, in a simple dark sweater instead of a tailored coat. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who had slept too little and thought too much. Maris lifted an eyebrow. "You came back." Adrian placed the bag on the chair. "You told me not to disappear." Maris huffed a laugh that turned into a cough. "I did." Lila stood up fast. "Do you have something?" Adrian reached into the bag and pulled out 3 things, a soft blanket, a small stuffed rabbit, and a simple card. "This is for you," he said to Maris, offering the card. Maris took it slowly, eyes narrowing. "What's this?" "A Valentine," Adrian said, voice dry. "Apparently I've been drafted." Lila covered her mouth to hide a giggle. Maris opened the card. Inside was handwriting, clean, controlled, but unmistakably human. She read silently. Her eyes softened. She didn't read it aloud, but Lila saw her lips tremble slightly. Maris closed the card and held it against her chest. "What did it say?" Lila asked. Maris smiled at her daughter. "It said, 'I am seen.'" Lila's eyes filled again. She hugged her mother carefully, mindful of tubes and tenderness. Adrian cleared his throat and handed the stuffed rabbit to Lila. "For you." Lila stared at it like it was the most precious object she'd ever held. "For me." He nodded. A Valentine should bring gifts. That's the rule, apparently. Lila hugged the rabbit tight. "Thank you, Mr. Vale." Adrian paused. "Adrian." Lila smiled shyly. "Thank you, Adrian." Maris watched the exchange, expression unreadable. Adrian placed the soft blanket over Maris's legs. It was a small act, gentle, almost intimate. Maris didn't pull away. They ate cake, slowly, with plastic forks, sharing small bites. Lila talked too fast, telling Adrian about school, about the time she got in trouble for drawing dragons instead of doing math, about how her mother used to sing when she washed dishes. Adrian listened. Really listened, as if he'd forgotten how. Maris spoke less, conserving energy, but when she did, her words mattered. "You know," she told Adrian, "Lila believes the world can be softened by sheer will." Adrian glanced at Lila. "Does she?" Maris nodded. "She's stubborn like that." Adrian's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "It seems effective." Later, after Lila fell asleep curled in the chair with the rabbit against her chest, Maris and Adrian spoke quietly. "You didn't have to do all this," Maris whispered. Adrian stared at the roses in the vase. "I know." Maris studied him. "Then tell me the truth." "Why?" Adrian's voice was low. "Because I've spent years pretending I don't owe the world anything. That I can build a fortress and call it freedom." He glanced at Lila sleeping. "But she walked up to me in the rain with 3 broken roses and asked for something money can't buy." Maris's eyes glistened. "Time." Adrian nodded. "I realized I've been hoarding time like it's mine alone." Maris took a shaky breath. "You can't fix everything." "I know," Adrian said. "But I can stop choosing not to try." Maris's gaze softened. "You're not a monster, Adrian. Just a man who got lost." Adrian's jaw flexed. "Maybe." Maris's voice weakened. "If I don't make it." "Don't," Adrian said sharply, then softened. "Don't say it like that." Maris smiled faintly. "It's reality." Adrian looked at her. "Then reality will have to fight harder." Maris's eyelids lowered. She looked so tired. "Take care of her," she whispered. "Not with money. With presence." Adrian's throat moved as if he swallowed something heavy. I can't make promises, I might fail. Maris's gaze held his. Promise you'll try. Adrian was silent. Then he nodded once. I'll try. The next morning, arrangements began for Maris to be transferred to Crescent Bay Pulmonary Institute. The process was complicated, full of signatures and approvals, but doors opened when Adrian spoke. Lila watched her mother being wheeled down the hallway, the blanket Adrian brought tucked around her legs, the roses in Lila's lap like a symbol of how this started. Maris reached out weakly and touched Lila's cheek. My brave girl, she whispered. Lila tried to smile through tears. You're going to get better, Mama. You will. Maris looked at Adrian standing nearby. Don't let her lose that hope. Adrian nodded, face tight. I won't. As the elevator doors closed, Lila looked up at Adrian. Her voice was small. Are you really coming with us? Adrian didn't hesitate. Yes. And in that moment, the billionaire stopped being an unbelievable guest star in their tragedy. He became part of their fight. Crescent Bay smelled different than Harborview. The air near the coast carried salt and wind, clean in a way that made Lila feel like she could breathe deeper. The Crescent Bay Pulmonary Institute was brighter than St. Callista. Large windows, soft colors, nurses who spoke calmly, as if hope was something they had in stock. Maris entered a new phase of treatment. Intensive therapy, stronger monitoring, experimental interventions that required patience and grit. Some days she looked better, color returning to her cheeks, eyes brighter. Other days, she looked worse, exhaustion dragging her down again. Lila learned quickly that healing was not a straight line. It was a messy road with sudden drops and surprising climbs. Adrian visited almost every day when he wasn't working. Sometimes he brought Lila books. Sometimes he brought Maris warm tea. Sometimes he brought nothing but himself, sitting quietly, reading reports on his tablet while staying close enough that Lila could feel his presence like a steady wall against fear. And slowly, Adrian changed too. He started leaving his phone face down more often. He started asking nurses their names. He started noticing things, the way Maris relaxed when Lila braided her hair, the way Lila's face lit up when someone treated her like she mattered, the way hospitals were full of people quietly carrying unbearable weight. One evening, Maris had a particularly hard day. Her breathing was labored, and she snapped at a nurse, then apologized, tears in her eyes. Lila sat beside her, devastated. It's my fault, she whispered. I made you fight when you're tired. Maris reached for her hand weakly. No, baby. You made me want to fight. Adrian stood by the window, staring out at the dark ocean. When he turned, his face looked haunted. She shouldn't have to fight this hard, he said. Maris managed a tired smile. Life is stubborn. Adrian's voice tightened. So are you. Maris's eyes softened. So are you, apparently. Adrian exhaled, then did something unexpected. He knelt beside Maris's bed, lowering himself so his eyes met hers, no wealth between them, no distance. I wrote something, he said quietly. Maris lifted an eyebrow. Another card? No, he said. A promise. Lila held her breath. Adrian's voice was steady. When this started, I thought I was doing a small kindness. A detour. A one-time moment. He looked at Lila. But you don't give people small moments, do you? Lila's lips trembled. I just wanted you to come. Adrian nodded. And you did. You pulled me into your world. He looked back at Maris. I can't pretend I'm unchanged. Maris's gaze held his. Good. Adrian swallowed. I won't romanticize this. I won't turn it into some headline. His eyes flashed with sincerity. But I will tell you this, whatever happens, Lila will not be alone. Not because I'm rescuing her. Because I'm choosing to be there. Maris's eyes filled with tears. Lila's chest tightened so hard she could barely breathe. You mean, forever? Adrian's gaze softened. I mean, as long as you'll let me. Maris closed her eyes briefly, a tear slipping down her cheek. When she opened them, her voice was small but fierce. Then don't disappear, Adrian Vale. Don't become a memory that hurts. Adrian nodded. I won't. Weeks passed. Maris had setbacks. She had small victories. She laughed one afternoon, actually laughed, when Lila insisted Adrian's serious face meant he needed to practice smiling like a normal person. Adrian tried. It looked awkward. Lila laughed harder. Even Maris smiled until she coughed. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. One morning, Dr. Ilara Song, the lead specialist, called Adrian and Maris into a meeting room while Lila waited outside with her rabbit. Lila watched through the glass as adults spoke with serious faces. Her stomach twisted. She pressed the rabbit tighter. After what felt like hours, the door opened. Maris stepped out first, eyes wet, smiling and crying at the same time. Adrian followed, face tight, but his eyes looked bright in a way Lila hadn't seen before. Lila stood up fast. What happened? Maris knelt with effort and cupped Lila's face. They found a pathway, she whispered. Not a miracle cure, but a real plan. A chance. Lila's knees went weak. A chance. Maris nodded. A fighting chance. Lila burst into tears, hugging her mother carefully. Adrian placed a hand on Lila's shoulder, steady, warm. Months later, Valentine's Day returned. This time, Maris wasn't in a hospital bed. She sat on a bench near the Crescent Bay shoreline, wrapped in a coat, watching Lila chase gulls with childish joy. Her breathing wasn't perfect, but it was hers, stronger, steadier. Adrian stood beside Maris holding a small bouquet. 3 red roses. He handed them to Maris without speaking. Maris smiled, eyes shining. You remembered. Adrian's voice was quiet. How could I not? Lila ran back, cheeks pink from the wind. What are we doing? Maris held up the roses. We're celebrating. Celebrating what? Lila asked. Maris looked at Adrian, then at Lila. That love can knock on any door. Adrian glanced at Lila. Even a door you didn't know was locked. Lila grinned. I knocked really hard. Maris laughed. Adrian's mouth curved, an actual smile this time, small but real. And as the ocean rolled endlessly behind them, Lila realized something important. Her mother's Valentine wish hadn't just been a goodbye. It had been a beginning. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment. Thank you.